The British countryside is in turmoil. Rolling hills and lush fields, once symbols of prosperity and stability, now tell a different story. The serene landscapes hide the struggles and hardships faced by those who work tirelessly to maintain them. Farmers, the backbone of our nation, are facing an unprecedented crisis. These hard-working individuals who rise before dawn and toil until dusk are now grappling with challenges that threaten their very existence. Their faces, etched with worry, reflect the gravity of the situation. The cost of farming is skyrocketing while the prices they receive for their produce plummet. Markets that once bustled with activity now stand eerily quiet with empty stalls and unsold produce. The economic imbalance is pushing many to the brink of bankruptcy. Fuel, fertilizer and animal feed have all seen dramatic price increases, squeezing already tight margins. The cost of essential supplies has soared, making it nearly impossible for farmers to break even, let alone make a profit. Every day is a battle to keep their operations running. The government, meanwhile, seems indifferent to their plight, turning a deaf ear to their pleas for help. Despite numerous protests and calls for action, policymakers remain unresponsive, leaving farmers feeling abandoned and unheard. Farmers are not asking for handouts. They're demanding fair prices for their produce, prices that reflect the true cost of production. They seek justice and recognition for their hard work, striving for a fair and sustainable agricultural system. They need support to weather the storm of rising costs and a commitment from the government to reduce the regulatory burden that stifles their ability to compete. The layers of bureaucracy and red tape add to their woes, making it harder to focus on what they do best, farming. For generations, British farmers have provided us with food security, environmental stewardship, and a way of life deeply rooted in the land. Their traditions and practices have been passed down through the ages, forming the bedrock of our rural heritage. They are custodians of our countryside, shaping and nurturing its beauty. Their efforts ensure that the land remains fertile and productive, preserving the natural splendor for future generations to enjoy. Yet their future is uncertain, their livelihoods hanging in the balance. The sight of empty fields and rusting equipment is a stark reminder of the precarious situation they face. Without immediate intervention, the consequences could be dire. The government must act now to secure a future for British farming. Concrete measures and policies are needed to address the challenges and provide the necessary support. The voices of farmers must be heard and their needs met with urgency. Failure to do so will not only devastate rural communities, but also threaten the very foundations of our food security. The ripple effects of inaction will be felt far and wide, impacting not just farmers, but the entire nation. It is a crisis that demands immediate and decisive action. The plight of British farmers is falling on deaf ears. The government, seemingly more concerned with appeasing corporate interests, has turned a blind eye to the crisis unfolding in the countryside. Despite their pleas for support, farmers are met with indifference and inaction. Instead of offering help, the government has chosen to impose even stricter regulations and environmental taxes on an already struggling industry. These measures, while well-intentioned, are pushing many farms to the brink of collapse. The financial burden of compliance is simply too great for many to bear. The government argues that these measures are necessary to combat climate change and protect the environment. However, many farmers feel that they are being unfairly targeted and that their contributions to environmental stewardship are being ignored. They point to their role in maintaining hedgerows, managing water resources, and preserving biodiversity. The government's neglect of the farming community is short-sighted and damaging. It is time for them to listen to the voices of those who feed our nation and work the land. Ignoring the crisis in the countryside will have dire consequences for us all. British farmers are facing a barrage of new regulations that threaten to overwhelm them. These regulations span a wide range of areas, from environmental protection to animal welfare, and even to the use of modern farming technologies. The sheer volume and complexity of these rules are creating a labyrinthine system that farmers must navigate daily. These regulations, often well-intentioned but poorly implemented, are adding to the already crippling financial burden faced by farmers. Many of these rules come with hefty fines for non-compliance, which can be devastating for small and medium-sized farms. The administrative burden alone is enough to cause significant stress, as farmers find themselves spending more time on paperwork than on actual farming. The cost of compliance is pushing many to the edge, forcing them to choose between investing in their farms or simply surviving. For instance, upgrading equipment to meet new standards can be prohibitively expensive, and many farmers are finding it difficult to secure the necessary funding. This financial strain is compounded by fluctuating market prices and the uncertainty brought about by Brexit. One of the most contentious issues is the strict regulations surrounding emissions from livestock. These rules are part of a broader effort to combat climate change, but they are seen by many farmers as overly stringent. The requirements for monitoring and reducing methane emissions from cattle, for example, are particularly challenging. While reducing emissions is a laudable goal, the current regulations are seen by many farmers as unrealistic and unattainable. The technology required to monitor and reduce emissions is not only expensive, but also complex to implement. Farmers argue that without adequate support and funding, these regulations are setting them up for failure. The technology required to meet these standards is often prohibitively expensive, and the support offered by the government is insufficient. Many farmers feel that they are being left to fend for themselves with little guidance or financial assistance. This lack of support is particularly problematic for smaller farms, which do not have the same resources as larger agricultural enterprises. Pesticide use is another area where farmers are facing increasing restrictions. These regulations are aimed at reducing the environmental impact of farming, but they are also making it more difficult for farmers to protect their crops. The list of approved pesticides is shrinking, and the application processes are becoming more stringent. While the need to reduce pesticide use is widely acknowledged, the current regulations are seen by many as overly restrictive and detrimental to crop yields. Farmers argue that they are being denied access to essential tools for managing pests and diseases, putting their crops at risk. The result is lower yields and reduced income, which further exacerbates the financial pressures they face. Farmers argue that they are being denied access to essential tools for managing pests and diseases, putting their crops at risk. The restrictions on pesticide use are forcing them to look for alternative methods, which are often less effective and more costly. This situation is creating a vicious cycle, where farmers are struggling to maintain their livelihoods while adhering to increasingly stringent regulations. The government's approach to land management is also causing concern among farmers. Policies aimed at promoting rewilding and conservation are leading to a reduction in the amount of arable land available for farming. While these initiatives are important for environmental protection, they are also seen as a threat to food production. The push for rewilding and the designation of vast swathes of land for nature conservation, while positive in principle, are seen by some as a threat to food production. Farmers argue that these policies are leading to a reduction in arable land and that the government is failing to strike the right balance between environmental protection and food security. The loss of productive land is making it harder for farmers to meet the growing demand for food. Farmers argue that these policies are leading to a reduction in arable land and that the government is failing to strike the right balance between environmental protection and food security. The loss of productive land is making it harder for farmers to meet the growing demand for food. As a result, many farmers feel that their livelihoods are being sacrificed in the name of environmentalism, and they are calling for a more balanced approach that takes into account the needs of both the environment and the agricultural sector. While British farmers struggle to survive, facing numerous challenges from economic pressures to climate change, a new player is emerging in the food industry: processed and lab-grown food. These innovations promise to reshape the way we think about food production and consumption. These products, often marketed as sustainable and ethical alternatives to traditional farming, are rapidly gaining traction. Companies are investing heavily in marketing campaigns to highlight the supposed benefits of these new food technologies, raising concerns about the future of our food system. Processed foods, which have been a part of our diet for decades, often high in sugar, salt, and unhealthy fats, are now being scrutinized more than ever. The convenience they offer comes at a cost to our health, have long been a staple of the modern diet. Fast food chains and ready-to-eat meals have become ubiquitous, making it easier for people to opt for quick but often unhealthy food choices. However, the rise of ultra-processed foods, which are engineered to be highly palatable and addictive, represents a new level of concern. These foods are designed to trigger pleasure centers in the brain, making it difficult for consumers to resist them, represents a new level of concern. These foods, stripped of their nutritional value and often containing artificial ingredients, are increasingly linked to health problems such as obesity, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. The long-term effects of consuming such foods are still being studied and often containing artificial ingredients, which can have unknown impacts on our health. Lab-grown meat are increasingly linked to health problems such as obesity, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. Lab-grown meat, hailed by some as a solution to the environmental impact of livestock farming, is another emerging trend. This technology aims to produce meat without the need for raising and slaughtering animals. Hailed by some as a solution to the environmental impact of livestock farming is another emerging trend. While the technology is still in its infancy, it has the potential to revolutionize the way we produce meat. While the technology is still in its infancy, proponents argue that it has the potential to revolutionize the way we produce meat, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and land use. The promise of lab-grown meat lies in its ability to provide a more sustainable and ethical alternative to traditional meat production. Proponents argue that it has the potential to revolutionize the way we produce meat, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and land use. However, critics argue that lab-grown meat is still energy-intensive to produce. And that it raises ethical concerns about the industrialization of our food system. The debate over lab-grown meat is far from settled, and that it raises ethical concerns about the industrialization of our food system. The rise of processed and lab-grown food raises important questions about the future of our food system. As these technologies continue to develop, the rise of processed and lab-grown food raises important questions about the future of our food system. While these technologies may offer some benefits, it is crucial that we carefully consider their potential impact on our health, environment. While these technologies may offer some benefits, such as reducing the environmental footprint of food production and providing new options for consumers, it is crucial that we carefully consider their potential impact on our health, environment, and the livelihoods of farmers. The transition to a more synthetic food system could have far-reaching consequences. It is crucial that we carefully consider their potential impact on our health, environment, and the livelihoods of farmers. The future of food is at a crossroads, and the choices we make today will shape the food landscape for generations to come, and the livelihoods of farmers. As we navigate this synthetic future, it is essential to balance innovation with tradition, ensuring that the benefits of new technologies do not come at the expense of our health, environment, or the well-being of those who have dedicated their lives to feeding us.